Recently, Silence the Paradigmatic had the unfortunate experience of being power crept twice on one banner, with Hoshi the Breacher being able to prevent multiple other units from dying, and with Haruka being the definitive abjurer. The only way Atto could have been worse for Silence would have been if, Staria started dating Kichusei at the end or something. But it's not like Silence Alt was especially popular before that. Abjurers have a pretty bad reputation overall. I mean, look at how much they had to give Haruka to get people to roll for her. However, as someone who built Silence Altar a while back, I've had a hard time removing her from my squad, as she's just really fun and comfy to use. But let's look at her kit, and I'll try to explain why I enjoy her so much. Abjurers are often first characterized by the fact that they do damage off-skill and heal on-skill. But the real core of their class identity is that they all provide a form of Sanctuary. Sanctuary as an effect is not limited to them alone, but it's an incredibly powerful tool that I think is often misunderstood and underappreciated. And to try to get across what makes it so valuable, I want to talk about a term called effective HP. This is a term meant to get across the impact of various forms of damage reduction and show how they actually impact survivability. The core idea is to figure out how much incoming damage is being reduced by, and then, with some patented mathemagic, aka spreadsheets, convert that into how much HP you'd need to survive those hits without that damage reduction. For example, if you have 100 HP and are going to take a hit that would normally do 100 damage, but you have a 50% damage reduction, that would mean you'd actually have to get hit twice before dying, meaning you have the equivalent of 200 effective HP. Now, admittedly, I picked the easiest numbers there to get across the concept, and the deeper you get into it, the more complex it gets. For instance, while having damage is pretty obviously doubling HP, reducing damage by 68%, for instance, doesn't have as obvious of a conversion, but you get the picture. There's also a reason it's not a term you'll see too often in Arknights discussions. It's just really variable in this game, making it impossible to give one definitive number for a unit, making actual discussions around it very difficult. For example, defense reduces damage by a flat number, not a percentage, and as such, the damage reduction is entirely dependent on the enemy's attack stat, and there just isn't much of a reason to calculate those things enemy by enemy, especially when even the most basic singular stage can have 6 or more enemy types. However, it's still the best way I know to get across how valuable Sanctuary can be. So I'm going to be using a slightly simplified version, and the damage numbers I'm using are already assuming you've subtracted defense, res, or any other relevant stats. Doing it this way doesn't actually have that much of an impact in this specific case, and I'll talk a bit more about it once you've seen the numbers, but well, let's get into it. So Silence's Sanctuary comes from her first talent, which states that all allies in range get a 10% Sanctuary effect, with this increasing linearly up to 24% as the allies' HP decreases down to 30% of their maximum. Without any skills active, this can already increase other units' effective HP by anywhere from 11% to 32% just by existing. While I'm just showing you the baseline talent effect for now, keep in mind that this effect can be multiplied by both her S2 and her S3. I'll show you the numbers for those later, but I want to wait to do it when I go over those skills, so you can have some context for what they're all about. However, one downside to Sanctuary is that multiple sources do not stack with each other. It stacks with other forms of damage reduction, like Viviana's talent or Gladia's Abyssal Hunter talent, and there aren't that many sources of Sanctuary that you run into anyway. But pairing her with units like Shu, who can provide Sanctuary on her Sode tiles, or Yu, who has his own Sanctuary built into his kit, can diminish Silence's contribution. Yes, her Sanctuary can outdo what they have in their kits, but either way, one of them will just not be using part of their kit while the other is present. And given that these are popular units to run, it's something to be aware of. However, it does actually work quite well with other forms of damage reduction. While you might think that this would be diluted by the fact that units have their own forms of defense and damage reduction already, I would remind you that this is a separate multiplier. To give an extreme example, if a unit already had 90% damage reduction, you wouldn't think taking them to 95% would make all that much of a difference. But that 5% extra damage reduction would actually take them from a 10 times multiplier to their effective HP to a 20 times multiplier. While these are just hypothetical numbers, this means that in practice, she can easily turn already durable units into Senator Armstrong. And this is why I've had such a hard time removing her from my squad, because with her around, your units just don't die. What's more is that her second talent and both of her mods work quite well with this concept. That second talent lets her give passive healing to all allies within her attack range with HP under 50%. This healing is also doubled for Rhine Lab operators, but I wouldn't necessarily feel pressured to specifically play around that squad. That said, it is worth noting that she is a Rhine Lab operator, meaning that if she takes some incidental damage while off skill, she'll still be somewhat equipped to handle it. Now this talent is pretty nice. Its HPS isn't anything too wild, but it gives your unit some wiggle room while she's off skill, letting non-Rhine ops recover 26.1 HP per second at max level and no mod. This is actually very close to what Perfumer can give with her mod, though notably this effect is limited to Silence's range. It is also limited to not being able to heal your units past 50%, but that's less of an issue when you consider that keeping allies there lets her give them a higher Sanctuary percentage. So while maybe a bit awkward, it's not really so bad. Additionally, because of that Sanctuary effect, while the HPS might be relatively low, it gets magnified somewhat into something a bit more significant in terms of EHP. So, also something to consider. Both of her mods also improve this second talent. Her mod X lets her heal allies for 100% of her attack on skill, rather than the normal 75% that Abjurers can do, which is a nice increase. The talent upgrades then further increase her passive healing, bringing it from 6% to 8%, and adds a new effect, letting her increase the HP of allies in range by 10%. All in all, this mod is very synergistic with her kit. The extra HP for allies is magnified by her Sanctuary effect, and also lets her now even better passive healing, up to 47.36 HPS at max level, restore allies to an even higher HP value without reducing the Sanctuary effect that they would receive. And this is really nice for mitigating the main downside of her not having normal heals off skill. The bigger heals on skill also help. She's typically more about doing smaller heals faster compared to traditional medics, which has its advantages, but increasing the value of those heals is a nice way for her to get a bit better at both sides of things. However, one thing to keep in mind is that this extra HP is additive, meaning that when she's specifically protecting units that have other forms of additive HP buffs, whether from skills, talents, or other units, this extra HP can be somewhat diluted. Her mod Y, meanwhile, lets her heal 2 targets at the same time on skill, and attack 2 at a time off skill. Meanwhile, the talent change this time is entirely focused on a new effect, letting her grant operators a barrier equal to 50% of her HP when they drop below 50% HP for the first time, with this effect doubling for Rhine operators like herself. This mod is, again, very synergistic with her kit, and I like it for a few reasons. For one, her healing multiple allies at once, paired with her very fast heals, means she can keep quite a few units topped up at once, and given that she doesn't really have traditional heals during her off-skill period, that can be very helpful for making sure everyone is ready to make it to the next skill activation safely. But as for the talent change, the way it's implemented is quite clever. Because it's specifically barrier, not healing, it means that those allies still benefit from the full Sanctuary effect they'd get from their reduced HP percentage, making the barrier they gain go a long way. And given that by virtue of being an Abjurer, she's not always on skill ready to heal, having that kind of insurance to keep your units alive can be really nice. I can't count the number of times it saved me while I was not paying nearly as close attention to a stage as I should have been. And when I have been paying attention, it's let me really get the most out of her very flexible skill timings. Additionally, this can make her incredibly durable herself, as the barrier is also doubled for Rhine operators, and again, she is a Rhine operator. So this lets you be really flexible in how you set up during a stage, as she can shrug off pretty much any hits she'd take in the process. So that's the one I personally have been using, but you can't really go wrong with either. And honestly, since her main draw is the Sanctuary effect, and that isn't affected by either mod, she also works just fine without one too. But let's finally talk about her skills. Her skill 1 is mostly forgettable. It's an attack increase, and, like all Abjurer skills, switches her over to healing. And that's it. The extra attack does improve her passive healing, and it has nearly 50% uptime, but it doesn't increase her Sanctuary effect at all like her S2 and S3 do. And that's kind of the big draw of an Abjurer, so personally, I'd skip the skill. Her skill 2, on the other hand, is far more interesting. It gives her plus 60 attack speed, and during the skill's duration, she can deploy a drone with a 3x3 range. In that drone's range, all units receive 3 times the effect of her regular Sanctuary. So, at max HP, they receive 30% Sanctuary, and at 30% HP, they receive 72%. Now, 72% is a very high number for Sanctuary, but you might think, well, at 30% HP, who cares about Sanctuary? They're already dead anyway. But, quiz time. Which image represents more effective HP? The image on the left with a unit with 30% HP and silences drone, or the same unit on the right with full HP but no silence alter? And you're right, that was an incredibly leading question. The unit with 30% HP in drone range has more effective HP than the same unit at full HP would outside of her range. In fact, a bit over 7% more. That level of Sanctuary provides a 3.57 times effective health multiplier, which is incredibly powerful. It means that the second you activate it, pretty much no matter their HP percentage, it's as if everyone in that range is suddenly above full HP. And when paired with a unit's own defenses and her very potent healing, it makes anyone in her drone's range basically unkillable. That is the power of 72% Sanctuary, which, I will point out, even after Haruka, is still the highest source of Sanctuary in the game. That said, this skill is not without its limitations. For one, it's specifically within the drone's range, not hers, which, while the drone can be placed anywhere on the map, giving her a global form of support, still means that she has to choose between fully supporting those in her range and those outside of it. That said, she is very good at healing on this skill and still has her regular Sanctuary, so I wouldn't worry about it too much if you need to use the drone to support elsewhere. The second thing to keep in mind is if you're coming from non-alter silence, this drone does not heal. So if you do have it outside of her range, you will still probably want another source of healing in that area. Still, this isn't that big of a constraint given that if you're that concerned about survival in a stage, you probably are going to need a source of healing over there in the first place. But the biggest thing to keep in mind is the very short duration. Now, this is a trade-off, as it both has an incredibly potent utility and an incredibly short cooldown for what it has to offer, giving it some very valuable flexibility, not to mention it being a form of pseudo-global support. So the low duration is ultimately what lets them balance that. But it's still worth bearing in mind that while it is very good against big instances of damage with cooldowns, like the Steam Knight barrage, it will not be facilitating a long-term stall. Yes, her standard Sanctuary and passive healing can still help with that, but if you're looking for something a bit more sustained, you're probably going to have to at least pair her with a medic, and maybe better served with another unit. That said, when the biggest complaint against medics and abjurers is why should I care about survivability when I can just kill things with meta DPS, Silence Alt S2 seems built specifically around guaranteeing that your units live long enough to evaporate the threat, and then resetting to be ready for the next one. Because that is 12 seconds of practical invincibility with a cooldown of only 24 seconds, while she still gives her base Sanctuary and regeneration in between. So despite its limitations, I still think this is a fantastic skill. And to step back from meta-analysis, it's also just really fun. My favorite skills are active ones with clear downsides that, if you work around them effectively, reward good play with strong upsides. And this has every single part of that. With its quick rotation, you can be very active with how you play around its timings. With the global drone, you can consider not just your strategy in her range, but across the entire map. And with the extreme level of that Sanctuary effect, if you play it right, your units can just be invincible. Plus, with how quick the rotation is, and the fact that the drone actually has a really short redeploy timer if you want to change up its positioning mid-skill, despite its limitations, it never really feels punishing when you mistime or misplace something either. So if you give one of her skills masteries, I would make it this one. Especially since the masteries have a very significant effect on her attack speed and thus healing output, the sanctuary multiplier for her drone, and the SP cost of the skill, which are all three of the reasons to use this skill in the first place. Her skill 3 is Silence the Paradigmatic's other main skill, and what was, until recently, her main unique niche. It increases her attack, multiplies the sanctuary effect in her range, and once per skill activation, she can prevent an operator from dying for up to 10 seconds. Now, this skill has a lot to like, but it does have one major caveat. But let's talk about the good first. For one, it's ready in just 10 seconds after her deployment and lasts a full minute. That's a full minute of very strong healing, and while the sanctuary effect isn't nearly as ridiculous as it is on her S2, the multiplier is still very valuable and can go a long way to keeping your units up, giving your units 22% to 76% more effective HP, with 18 to 43.2% sanctuary, depending on their current HP percentage. And if that's not enough, she has a failsafe in the form of that death prevention. And given how good her healing and sanctuary is, there's a good chance you'll be able to stabilize that unit by the time that death prevention ends. Plus, once that skill's finally over, it only has a 30 SP cost, meaning that it'll be back up in no time. The downside, however, is that second activation will be the last time you activate it in that stage. Yes, unfortunately, you can only activate it twice per battle. This isn't a game breaker. A lot of stages are short enough where you wouldn't even get to a third activation anyway. And if you've planned out a stage, you can make those 2 activations go a long way. However, I still don't really like this way of restricting a skill. Whereas the limitations of her S2 felt like something that you can proactively work around, and like something that rewards your own skill with both her kit and the level itself, this more so feels like something that'll lead you to hold on to that second activation, just in case something comes up, which isn't as fun. Still, on stages that aren't ridiculously long, such that you'd run out of uses, it's still very good. And even though we now have Hoshi Alter who can do a similar thing for multiple units, 1, Silence is capable of actually healing those units to stabilize them so that they don't die right after the skill. 2, this skill still has its sanctuary and great uptime. And 3, this skill does not forcibly retreat Silence at the end of it, which means that there is still some space for using either. Or you could just use both and Surtur and have no one die ever. The other thing about this skill is that her S2 drone sanctuary is just so strong that a lot of the time, if you're using this for the death prevention, that skill will do the same job no problem. It's still a nice thing to have on this skill, and it still has other things going for it, like the long duration and high uptime. And there absolutely are cases where this will keep an operator alive, but even 72% sanctuary would not. But it's still something to keep in mind. The last thing to know about this skill is that it really doesn't get much at all from masteries. The SP cost is worse without them, which is definitely relevant since its uptime is a big part of its appeal in a suitable stage. But the only other change is the undying duration. Her sanctuary, attack, and the skill duration all remain the same from skill level 7 to M3. Now, again, the low SP cost and the undying effect are big parts of the reason you'd use this skill in the first place, so investing in those isn't a bad idea. However, while her S2 is a very different skill at skill level 7 versus M3, her S3 will still feel mostly the same at skill level 7. So if you have the resources, I'd consider masteries, but I'd prioritize her S2 first. Anyway, I hope I've shown why she's so good for survivability, but why should you care about that? There are some unbelievably strong meta DPS units out there now, so why would you have to heal if everything is just dead as soon as it spawns? Well, lately it seemed like perhaps the main direction they're taking the game to balance around the influx of DPS units is to provide an increased emphasis on survivability checks. With things like H12-4, H15-4, and honestly, all 3 IS-6 bosses so far to some extent, the challenge isn't necessarily having enough damage, it's keeping your units alive for long enough to deal this damage. It doesn't matter how much damage Wishdale can do if she gets stomped by the Suileg, or exploded by the Liang splash damage. For her, or anyone else for that matter, to get their damage in and take out these bosses, they have to live long enough to do so. While a number of these units have some form of survivability built into their kits, it is not a guarantee that it will get all of them through all of these fights all of the time, especially when the devs like to plan around those specific units' weaknesses in particular. This is where Silence Alter comes in. No, she is not the only answer, and she is not a solo carry in the way that damage-focused units can be. But when HG seems to be looking at your units and saying, nice DPS, but how are you going to keep them out there? Silence provides a resounding and valuable answer all the same. Hey, thanks for watching. This was originally going to be part of a video where I went over a few underrated units at once, but it turns out I had a lot more to say about Silence Alter than I thought I did. So, I guess I'll have to think up another unit to use for that one. But anyway, while you're here, consider subscribing. I really appreciate the support. And as always, thanks to my channel members, and Auf Wiedersehen.